Do we have a quorum? I guess we can start without a quorum, can't we?
Oh, we got
Yeah.
right on time.
Okay, I'm going to start this thing. Good morning and welcome through the 1/2-inch Washington blizzard this morning. Everybody trudged through the 1/2 inch of snow to get here. This morning, the meeting will come to order. I want to welcome everyone to today's hearings, which is the 7th this committee has held examining the construction of the new Rocky Mountain Regional Medical Center in Aurora, Colorado. The road to completing this hospital has been extremely long and bumpy. The groundbreaking ceremony was held in 2009. All told, the price tag is at least $2 billion. This situation must never happen again. But the finish line is near. Mr. Coffman, Mr. Congressman Perlmutter, and myself toured the medical center last week to see personally about this. Today we are here to discuss how near and take a close look at the facility that has been produced. This construction debacle changed the way VA builds hospitals. In 2015, Congress mandated that another expert agency take over management of all VA superconstruction projects, which is everything over $100 million. That agency is the Army Corps of Engineers. All available evidence suggests this was the right decision. In just over 2 years, the Army Corps has guided the project from less than 60% complete and mired in contractor disputes to 98% complete. VA has accepted all but one of the buildings, the Diagnostic and Treatment Center. But the end of construction is merely the beginning of VA's activation effort. Activation is never easy, and unfortunately, in this hospital's activation, the team must continue to correct design and construction errors. The design of this facility began over 10 years ago. It has already been well established how architectural novel and extravagance drove up this construction cost. In addition to that, so much time has elapsed that the practice of medicine, building codes, and intended uses for the spaces have changed. It is deeply troubling that this new Aurora Medical Center doubles the square footage of the existing Denver Medical Center, but includes the same number of beds and actually reduces primary care capacity. There are also hundreds of errors, individually but small, which add up to a significant problem and that must be corrected. Things like sink in an operating room, surfaces that can't be cleaned, inadequate air conditioning systems, voltage problems, and an entire data center that must be rearranged. There are also mistakes to be fixed at the end of the construction job, but I have to wonder whether the clinicians who will treat veterans in this facility have ever scrutinized its specifications. Even after the new medical center opens, VA must continue operating the old medical center because presently some of the primary care doctors and the PTSD residential rehabilitation facility have nowhere else to go. When Congress authorized this project and continued to authorize it through all its struggles, having two major VA hospitals 6 miles apart was never part of the deal. The local leadership expressed their commitment to closing down the old facility as soon as possible and recouping as much money from the taxpayers from the assets as they can. This committee is going to make sure that that happens. H.R. 4243, the VA Asset and Infrastructure Review Act, which we reported out of the committee in November, would give the VA the tools it needs to expedite building a new PTSD rehab facility on the Aurora campus and cut through bureaucratic hurdles to dispose of the Denver campus. And I can tell you, after visiting out there last week, this particular facility is a poster child for why we need VA asset review. If any of you all have any doubt about that, please make the trip to Denver and look. And it will absolutely reassure, it will give you peace. It did me to know that we need to do this. Now is the time to add up what has been gained and lost from this experience. VA added a state-of-the-art spinal cord injury treatment center. And I do want to mention that this truly is a state-of-the-art. That was one of the most impressive parts of my trip, was this new spinal cord treatment center. It is going, there's could not be a better one, I think, in the world, maybe. And I know that the DAV, the Disabled Veterans, looked at this, helped design it, which I thought was really smart. And I want to commend the VA for this. And I think once it's implemented, it will be really a state-of-the-art facility for our injured veterans. Also, new imaging capabilities, amenities for patients, and a modern facility of the burgeoning veteran populations decades into the future. On the other side of the ledger, VA lost a significant amount of primary care space and must continue correcting defects potentially up to the day the doors open. And of course, successive groups of VA managers have spent a mind-boggling amount of taxpayer money. That being said, I now yield to Ranking Member Walz for his opening comments.
Well, thank you, Chairman Rowe, and thank you all for being with us. We were just discussing earlier that I'm entering my 12th year in Congress and have the most amount of time here along with Chairman Rowe. This project was approved before we got here. It has been here my entire congressional career. Mentioned it's older than my son Gus, who's 11. So again, with all due seriousness on this, we know, and again, knowing what went wrong here and the number of hearings we held here, some of them in prime time over this issue, our responsibility of those of us sitting here now is about the lessons learned. And I would argue under Chairman Rowe's leadership and Mr. Kaufman and others, the way we've approached this has changed. The hand of Congress exercising its oversight authority has been much more present. It's been much more forceful, and for that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you. This is about fixing problems, not just complaining that they were there, and so I'm grateful. Been waiting over 15 years for this replacement hospital. Now it finally appears Colorado veterans will have the state-of-the-art facility that they deserve. We're all intimately familiar, as I said, with the history of project schedule overruns. It's important we apply these lessons we've learned from this project and apply them to the Army Corps' model for project management to future VA superconstruction projects. Now that the facility will be turned over to VA this month for activation, VA needs to ensure it is able to adhere to the activation schedule so veterans can start receiving care at their new facility later this summer. Today, I hope we get assurances from VA that the staff and resources are there to open on time. I want VA to ensure it is working closely with the Army Corps to complete construction. My greatest concern is whether VA has the infrastructure in place to meet the needs of veterans in Colorado and its neighboring states. We know the veterans receiving their care at the Denver Medical Center experience some of the longest wait times in the country. Due to significant cost overruns for this project, the much-needed PTS residential treatment facility was not constructed, and additional funds will be needed to build this facility on the Aurora campus. 7 primary care teams will continue to operate out of the existing Denver facility, along with the Community Living Center for the next 3 years. Solutions are needed to address these significant infrastructure and capacity needs so veterans do not continue to wait for their care. I hope the VAs come prepared to discuss solutions today, prepared to work with Congress, State of Colorado, and the City of Denver to address those needs. Thank you, Chairman Rowe, for your leadership, and I yield back.
Thanks, gentlemen, for yielding. Now, I'd like to welcome our panel who are seated at the witness table. On our panel, we have Ms. Estella Fiotes, Acting Principal Executive Director of the VA Office of Acquisition, Logistics, and Construction. She is accompanied today by Mr. Dennis Milston, Director of Operations for the VA Office of Construction and Facilities Management. Ms. Fiotes is also accompanied by Mr. Ralph Gelati. And I might mention that when I picked up my rental car in Denver, this young man who rented me my car said, "I think you're going to see my dad tomorrow." That would be Mr. Gelati, which tells you it's a very small world. Director of Veterans Integrated Service Network 19, which covers Colorado and neighboring states. We also have Mr. Lloyd Caldwell, the Director of Military Programs for the United States Army Corps of Engineers, and thank you for being here. And finally, we have Mr. Andrew Van Ah, Director of Physical Infrastructure for the Government Accountability Office. I will ask our witnesses to raise your right hand. And do you solemnly swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to provide is the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you, and let the record reflect that all witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Ms. Fiotes, you're recognized now for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to update this committee on the status of the construction of the new Rocky Mountain Regional VA Medical Center in Aurora. I am accompanied today by Mr. Dennis Milston and Mr. Ralph Gelati. We are pleased that this facility will enable us to serve over 390,000 Colorado veterans and their families as we work to ensure that local veterans receive the VA services that they have earned and deserve. Upon opening, the Rocky Mountain Regional VA Medical Center will provide the same robust range of tertiary healthcare services that currently are available at the Denver VA Medical Center, with the addition of mammography and PET-CT to its imaging services. The exception is the Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Residential Rehabilitation Treatment Program and 7 patient-aligned care teams that are currently slated to remain in the old facility. We are working, however, on options that will allow their relocation off the existing campus as quickly as possible to allow for ultimate closure and disposition of the old facility. The Rocky Mountain facility is also proud to be the latest spinal cord injury and disorder center within the VA system. This center will serve populations in Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and parts of Nebraska and South Dakota. The SCI Center will include both an outpatient clinic and inpatient unit, offering comprehensive multidisciplinary care for patients with spinal cord injury, multiple sclerosis, and amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Lastly, the new facility will provide a much more up-to-date and positive veteran and family experience. This includes private rooms for patients with their bathrooms, as well as space for family members to stay overnight, an intensive care unit with an 800-square-foot waiting room suite, and all interventional services such as surgery and radiology to be located adjacent to preoperative and postoperative beds to improve the coordination of care and efficiency of service delivery. I am pleased to tell you that the construction contract with Kiewit Turner is 98% complete, and 11 of the 12 structures have been turned over for activation. VA and the United States Army Corps of Engineers are currently working through contract completion items and actively working with the contractor to bring this contract to an end as swiftly as possible. Activation activities are ongoing, and the facility will open to serve local veterans in August 2018. The current activation schedule has the majority of installation, calibration, and testing of newly procured equipment being completed in May. This will enable the Denver Medical Center staff to complete over 40,000 staff hours of education, training, and orientation in late July. VA's current activation budget of $341 million provides sufficient funding to service the opening of this facility. During the Corps' construction management of the project, the contractor proposed to concentrate labor on completing and turning over the campus to VA building by building, rather than a longer process of delivering it in full by the contract completion date of January 2018, which saved a substantial amount in KT overhead costs. KT is the contractor. Additionally, the Corps will not incur the estimated staffing costs they budgeted for the project and will be returning approximately $10 million of unused funds to VA. VA has worked diligently to improve the management and oversight of our major construction program by partnering with the Corps and incorporating lessons learned to ensure that the challenges faced on this project will not happen again. I'm here to tell you that VA today is doing business very differently than in the past. We are rethinking everything about how we will modernize our infrastructure to find ways to deliver much-needed facilities smarter, faster, and at significantly less cost. Just one example is a recent project in Omaha, Nebraska, where we have partnered with private donors and entities to deliver an ambulatory care center for our veterans in half the time and 30% cheaper than our traditional way of doing business. We are also looking at the next major projects to see how we can find smarter solutions, speed their delivery for veterans' use, and lessen the cost to taxpayers. In closing, VA is thankful for the work this and other congressional committees have done to help VA navigate the challenges this project has posed and for securing the funding necessary for its planned completion. VA remains committed to ensuring the project provides a facility where veterans will receive the best 21st century health care in a manner where the Department, Congress, veteran service organizations, and local stakeholders work together for the benefit of our nation's veterans. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the committee. My colleagues and I would be pleased to answer questions from you and members of the committee.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Caldwell, you'll now recognize for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you on behalf of Lieutenant General Todd Simonite, the Chief of Engineers. I provide leadership for the execution of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers engineering construction programs in support of the Department of Defense and other agencies of the federal government. Today we've been asked by the committee to testify on the subject of the Denver Replacement Medical Center in Aurora, including the Corps' accounting of construction costs known to date and ancillary construction activities. In addition, I will provide information pertaining to the Corps' lessons learned. While the Corps has the lead in construction execution of the Denver Hospital, the VA remains responsible for project requirements, resourcing, and facility transition to full operations. In December of 2014, the VA and the Corps entered into an Economy Act agreement to allow the Corps to assess the Denver Hospital project, and subsequent modifications to that agreement and a new agreement provided the Corps the funding and the authority to transition the project's construction agent responsibility to the Corps. During construction, the Corps and the VA have collaborated well and have collaborated with the staff of the House Veterans Affairs Committee to provide transparency of the completion status, ongoing activities, changes, and expenditures associated with the project. Additionally, VA and the Corps have provided quarterly briefings to the committee staff on the project's completion status. Our contract provided a target value for completion of the project of $570.75 million, including, in addition to that, we had a contingency for unforeseen conditions, which we held in the amount of a little over $14 million, for a total estimated construction value of $585 million. With the construction now 98% complete, our current estimate anticipates that upon final completion, we will have expended about $555 million for the construction, resulting in about $30 million being returned to the VA. Additionally, we anticipate returning $10 million from the government and contract oversight and audit costs that we had estimated. This will result in a total of approximately $40 million being returned to the VA from the original $625 million, which was provided to the Corps for the project. The construction is on schedule for substantial completion of all buildings this month. There will remain ancillary construction activities for the project, which fall in two categories. One is punch list items, and the other are modifications to address current medical facility requirements. Punch list requirements are routine with any construction requirement. They involve typically minor work remaining for construction or completion that the contractor must finalize to be in full compliance with the contract. These punch list items should not delay the occupancy and use of the facility. The second category typically involves emergent requirements which are necessary to assure the new facility complies with current codes and practices that may have evolved over the course of construction. These emergent requirements will be a contract action separate from the Kiewit-Turner contract. We anticipate completing these requirements using the same government team currently on the project, but with a new contract. We're currently targeting to have this work completed by the summer of 2018. We made the decision to address these emergent medical requirements via a new contract since this course of action provides clarity and transparency to completion of the project and assures finality in completion of the larger contract. The decision allows the current contractor to concentrate on completing their contract requirements. As part of our process, we review our project execution to identify lessons learned. While this project is not complete, we have been recording lessons learned. One significant lesson learned is the value of consistent senior executive review of the project. The senior executive review group for this project is comprised of senior leaders from the VA, the contractor, and the Corps. This group met regularly on the project to provide guidance. This commitment at the senior levels of all stakeholders helped to ensure that the entire team remained focused on the success of the project and achieving our collective goals. At the completion of the project, the final package of lessons learned will be formally documented and published. We're pleased to be nearing completion of the project and believe that the completion of the hospital will be a great source of value to the veterans in the region. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. Thank you for allowing me to be here today to discuss the work, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Mr. Van Al, you now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Rowe, Ranking Member Waltz, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss our March 2017 report on VA major construction projects, which review the Denver Medical Center project, among others. We have previously reported and testified on VA's struggles in managing the Denver project. The project's substantial cost increases and schedule delays are well known to this committee and the audience here today. While the Army Corps of Engineers has an agreement with VA to oversee completion of major construction of the Denver project, which is scheduled to finish this month, VA is responsible for activation, which is the process of bringing a facility into full operation. Activation is scheduled to continue through this summer. My remarks today are based on our 2017 report, which highlighted several opportunities for improvement in VA's management of these projects, particularly with respect to activation, and follow up on our recommendations from July 2017 to January of 2018. In our 2017 report, we made 2 recommendations related to activation of the VA facility, the Denver facility. That VA, 1, develop a reliable activation cost estimate for the Denver project, and 2, clarify policies on integrating construction and activation activities. VA agreed with these recommendations and has been taking steps to implement them. First, with respect to activation cost estimates, we found in 2017 that VA had minimal documentation supporting its estimate of the cost of activation for the Denver project, which we therefore found to be unreliable. The most recent estimate we received for the Denver facility is $341 million. With minimal documentation, we recommended that VA develop and document an activation cost estimate for the project that is reliable and conforms to best practices as described in GAO's cost estimating and assessment guide. The lack of a reliable estimate can make it difficult for VA to manage its budget and also poses difficulties for Congress, which relies on it to make appropriations decisions. In July 2017, VA provided us with new documentation on its estimate. We analyzed this information and found that it did not meet best practices. Of the 4 characteristics of a reliable cost estimate, Denver's activation estimate partially met 2 and only minimally met 2 others. Specifically, we found that it's unclear how VA is developing a good picture of the estimate's sensitivity to risk. A sensitivity analysis is important so decision makers have an idea of how close to the point estimate they can expect the project to be. VA has provided comments on our assessment, concurring with some of it and identifying additional information for us to consider. While VA has made improvements in its documentation of the estimate since our report, such as documenting discussions with management and including more detailed information, we still cannot find that the current estimate meets the characteristics of a reliable estimate. VA officials also indicated they are taking steps such as developing training and providing GAO's cost estimating guide to staff in an effort to improve activation estimates going forward. With respect to the activation schedule, we found in 2017 that VA's policies were not clear or consistent on how to link construction and activation schedules to form an integrated master schedule for the entire project. For the Denver project, in part because of the lack of clarity and consistency in policy, we found that certain activities and milestones in these schedules were not aligned with each other. For example, we found 3 different dates for the same milestone in the existing schedules in March of 2017. In response to our recommendation, VA has clarified its policy documents, which we have reviewed and verified, and reinforced that all projects develop and maintain an integrated master schedule that includes and links all construction and activation activities. Moreover, VA officials indicated that they have worked with the Corps to resolve inconsistencies in linking construction and activation activities for the Denver Medical Center. This and other actions VA is taking with respect to cost estimating, as well as tracking change orders, if fully implemented, should improve VA's ability to manage its projects going forward. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my oral statement. I'd be happy to address any questions you or members of the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, and I'll now recognize myself to begin the questioning. And I want to start by saying that I think there are a dedicated group of people in Denver, Colorado who are mission focused on getting this hospital open and providing this incredible new facility for our veterans out there. We met with Mr. Kaufman, and I met with, and Mr. Paul Mutter, with the Chief of Staff, with the Chief of Nursing, with the Visiting Director, the Chief of Surgery, Chief of Nursing. And just to give you an idea how these folks are already thinking, this building is laid out a little different than any hospital I've ever seen. It's 1,100 feet long. So I would recommend, Mr. Poliquin, that you donate some Nikes, or New Balance, I'm sorry, from your district for people to walk in. And just to give you an idea, that the Chief of Nursing and the physicians and nurses had already started thinking, we're going to have to use our code blue is going to have to be different because it's so far to get from one end of it to the other. They will have to have a different way to do code blue. So they're already thinking ahead about how they provide quality care for our veterans. When you look at the facility, and I just want to go over this very quickly before I ask any questions. When this facility was laid out, what we got was this, a facility that's 1.2 million square feet. as opposed to 600,000 square feet of the previous facility. We got 4 more ICU beds. We got 9 less medical beds, the same rehab beds, less psychiatric beds, of which we need more of, and a psychiatric facility is going to have to be modified because of design errors that are there. You did add the spinal cord injury, which I've already talked about. PTSD, which we know is a critical part of the VA's mission, was not even included in this. The VA had to buy an additional building for administrative offices. In this 1.2 million square feet, there were no administrative offices, at least none that I saw. And primary care rooms where we examined patients went from 60 to 34. So we actually lost primary care, which is where our care has been given. That actually may be in our PAC teams are going to have to stay at the old facility with an aging boiler. So we're going to have to keep the facility open. It won't be 3 years. It'll be more like 5 years, I can tell you, before you can design and build other facilities. That's the minimum amount of time you're going to have to keep it open. And if it does stay open, there's an estimate that there'd be $350 million worth of work that would have to be done to a campus that you're going to get rid of. Now, none of this makes a lot of sense. So I bring that up just to sort of give you a Cliff Notes version of where we are. And Ms. Fields, I appreciate you and Mr. Milstein coming out to Colorado to tour the new medical center with us. And how do you assess what is good and what is problematic about the Aurora facility's design, and what do you attribute the problems?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I think that the design, we can all agree, was probably more complex than it needed to be. The design was prepared a long time ago. Requirements have evolved over time, and that probably is part of the reason that the capacities are smaller right now, including in the primary care patient-aligned care teams, which were not in existence when the building was originally designed, were introduced later, and because of the additional space that they take, have actually reduced the capacity of the new clinical space in comparison to the old facility. So going forward, we have learned much from this design that we would not replicate in any future designs. I believe a more compact design would have resulted in a more efficient, functional hospital, and probably at a lesser cost.
Thank you. Mr. Gelati, does the new facility meet all of your needs and your employees' needs?
The new facility is short, as you stated, on primary care space. So there will be 7 primary care teams that will be left behind at the current facility. We are actively identifying, working with a brand new Loveland, Colorado community-based outpatient clinic that opens up this April. We're looking at expanding the footprint in Aurora for a community-based outpatient clinic that we already have there. And then we're looking at adding another community-based outpatient clinic in the metro area. We're also working closely with the Veterans Benefits Office. We have Comp and Pen in our C-Box in Colorado Springs and Golden, and we're looking to work with them to take Comp and Pen out of those clinics so that we can have more room for PAC teams, so that those 7 teams can go into the community and that we could dispose of the building quickly.
Well, my time has expired, but I would like to say that if we do the asset review, you'll be able to take those assets and they are going to be a lot when you had that VA property, and reinvest that back into VA. I think that makes a lot of sense. Mr. Walsh, you recognized.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to reiterate, I agree with the chairman on the asset review piece, and I think it does give us opportunities. There's obviously some differences of how we get there, but this is a highlight of why that should be. I would say, Mr. Caldwell, to you, we were looking back as early as 2010. I think Chairman Miller, myself, some of us who were here at that time, Chairman Rowe, were advocating that your involvement was needed, that you are construction people as opposed to VA. So I'm grateful you're there. But once the original construction contract with KT is complete, as we heard, there's final contract with another contractor to adjust those remaining items such as code upgrades. Will this impact the cost of construction and the schedule for opening the facility?
Sir, there is obviously a cost associated with that new contract. We're in the process of developing that cost estimate. I can tell you we think it's in the order of, let's say, between $5 million and $10 million for that contract. But it will not delay the opening of the facility. The plan is to have that contract awarded within the next couple of months, have them working in April, and have them completing by the end of June or early July. So we believe it will support the opening of the hospital.
Very good, thank you. And I'd like to take a minute now. I'm going to ask the next question based on some things in the Denver Post. If any of us needs a reminder of the importance of a free and professional press in this country, the service that was done to our veterans and the taxpayers of Colorado and to this country by the folks at the Denver Post. I'd like to highlight Daniel Brenner and Mark Matthews' work in that. We followed that here, and those are things that came up, and the partnership in helping us get that has been critically important. And this week, they indicated trying to, and in their right to ask these questions, the hiring of staff at the medical center. And do you have sufficient staff for the medical center to open? Are there challenges with the tight labor market? And give us the time frame on that of making sure that those FTEs are in place when we go.
So we are on target for the opening this summer. We have 421 FTE to be hired for the new project. We've already hired 257, 118 positions still to be hired to support the Spinal Cord Injury Center that was referenced earlier. That will not open until 180 to 200 days after the opening of the facility, and that's in concert with the PVA. They want to make sure the hospital is up and running and seamless and working well, and then we will open up the Spinal Cord Injury Center approximately 6 months after that. So Denver is a difficult labor market. Unemployment rates are around 3%, which is very low. But we are making excellent progress. We are confident that we will be able to meet the staffing needs. But if for anything arises that we're not able to, we have other tools available, contracts and other types of staffing until we're able to actually hire. But we are confident we'll meet the staffing needs to open up by August.
We've had a lot of hearings in here and talked about some of the burdens to being able to quickly hire folks, some of the problems that are there. Are you experiencing just the usual bureaucratic hurdles, if you will?
I would summarize it that way, yes, sir.
Maybe when we're done with this, those are maybe some lessons learned on what we can do here of what you're doing to help us with that. This to Mr. Van Ahn, what progress has VA made in addressing GAO's recommendation on activation cost estimates? Because if there's anything here, we're pretty browbeat by projected estimates and then coming back to us over and over and over. And I just want to make sure that it appears like there could be some pitfalls here that get us into that same thing.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Congressman. VA has taken a number of steps. I would characterize it as early steps in the process of building the capacity to do good cost estimation for activation. There's training that's been talked through. They've provided the cost estimating guide that GAO has developed to their staff in an effort to get people up to speed on how to do good cost estimation for activation. So I would say that they're definitely taking steps in that direction. As far as the current Denver estimate, that's something that's sort of already done and completed, and we're not, we don't have any concerns at this point of whether, that they're going to go, not meet the schedule and costs that they've put forth. But we still, look back at that and say that that wasn't a reliable estimate from our perspective based on the lack of a risk and uncertainty analysis.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of you, though, over the last 12 to 18 months. The communication and the transparency of helping us get this has really been great, and I'm grateful for that. I yield back.
Thanks, gentlemen, for yielding. I'll now yield to Mr. Kaufman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Awe, when you look at the activation plan of the VA, I think that was found to be inadequate by your analysis. And so we have, I led the fight to strip the VA of their construction management authority. I wanted $10 million. VA put out $250 million. The number that we settled on was $100 million. I think that's unfortunate. I think it needs to go down further. But that's only for the construction management phase. That's not, that number, 100 million, doesn't include activation.
Correct.
So it seems like we have the same sort of mismanagement problems when it comes to activation that we had for construction management under VA supervision. Is there any precedent? I mean, does the Army Corps of Engineers or does GSA or anybody else do activation as part of the construction management for an agency, in an agency relationship?
Right. The scope of our work didn't cover that. I'm not sure,
Sure.
if that's the case or not. So I mean, we could look into that and get back to you, Mr.
Let
Clerk.
me go to the Army Corps of Engineers. Does anybody else, when you do other hospitals for other agencies, like for the Department of Defense, do you do the activation, or does, say, the United States Army or the Air Force or whoever you're doing it for do the activation?
Mr. Kaufman, Congressman Kaufman, that function is typically handled by the medical departments, and we restrict ourselves to that area that we have expertise, which is really in the design and construction. We do, on occasion, assist with the initial outfitting and transition of the facility, because that may involve purchasing equipment, furniture, and other kinds of supplies. So we do assist the activation in that regard. One of the things that we in the VA are working together on for the other hospitals that we expect to assist them on and are assisting will be an activation plan, so that we can, early in the life of those projects, can identify what the requirements are, what the respective parties and stakeholders will bring to that plan to ensure that it comes together effectively.
I just want to say the fact that Ms. Fotis is here today, and some of the other players that have their fingerprints all over this $1 billion in cost overruns, is a signal to me that the VA has not changed. And so whatever we can do to strip their authorities in terms of construction management, in terms of activation, I think is necessary. And Ms. Fotis, you said that, I'm not clear on what your explanation is in having gone in the planning process of having 34 primary care examining rooms when the existing facility has 60 and cannot accommodate 7 PAC teams, 7 primary care teams in the new facility, requiring us to keep part of the old facility open. Can you really explain how that number 34 was devised?
I will try, Congressman. Although the PAC teams and the 34 and 60 were not in existence when the project was designed, which is what I tried to explain. When the design was developed, 2009, 2010, there were no PAC teams. At the time, the medical center and the construction entities believed that the project was sized to accommodate the necessary primary care clinics. As time evolved, the patient-aligned care teams came into existence. They take up more space than the regular clinics do, and that has resulted
Well, that's still not an explanation. I mean, the fact is that you have X number of primary care personnel, no matter how they're arranged. You had that much capability in terms of exam rooms, and you have almost half the number here.
Again, we're talking about a design that was developed many years before the construction was completed.
So then we're in 2009, 2010, we are a nation at war in Afghanistan and Iraq, and you all can't amend that plan?
I can't answer that, sir. I wasn't there.
Well, so then, and why wasn't PTSD included in the initial project?
I believe PTSD was taken out of the scope of the project before the final appropriation of authorization.
Do you know why?
I do not recall exactly.
I just don't know how you could not have answers to these questions and be in the position that you're in. I mean, that absolutely makes no sense.
Again, Congressman, I am going by what I have heard, not what I experienced. I believe the PTSD was removed at the time of the authorization appropriation to bring the costs down.
Well, how about this?
Gentleman's time's expired. We are going to have a second round. Mr. Takano, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I just want to mention for the record that 2.5 to 3 years ago, this committee authorized additional funds to complete the replacement facility. And at that time, this committee, and by a quick count of 9 of us who were here on the committee at that time, this committee decided to reduce the scope of the facility by not funding the PTS inpatient or the assisted living facilities. So to act shocked that part of the old facility will still need to be used moving forward is ridiculous. We knew what we were doing, and now we decide, do we invest the money or so we can move everything to the new campus, or do we keep the status quo and continue to use it as a political pawn? That being said, what are the plans for expanding the Aurora facility to include these services?
So the PTSD is Deputy Secretary Gibson, in one of his last acts as Deputy Secretary, notified the 8 Corners that because this is a replacement hospital, it's the first true replacement hospital to move since Detroit in the 1990s. And because it's a replacement hospital, he made the determination in coordination with General Counsel that PTSD should move over to the new site, and notified the 8 Corners, and there was no objections. We went out for a minor project. Unfortunately, when the bids came in for that, it was over the minor threshold, came in about $3 million over the $10 million threshold. So we have our process for trying to get it into a major. So that is one thing. The second piece is the Community Living Center. Currently, the veterans that were in our Community Living Center are being seen in the community. We follow them. The care is going very well. That is also in our SCIP process for long-term solution of building a community living center on the campus at Fitzsimmons.
Well, my question is, in order to complete a PTS residential treatment facility and community living center that were deleted from the project, what are the plans for the VA to expand the Aurora facility, include these PTSD treatment? Are they priority projects? What is the estimated cost of each of these future projects?
So we were hopeful that the cost for the PTSD would be below the $10 million threshold. It came in higher. It is a priority. The care will be rendered at the existing medical center site now. If we have to go into an emergency lease scenario while we're waiting funding for the PTSD, if we're able to excise the current, we will do that.
So it's above $10 million, you're saying?
It came in above $10 million.
So 10 million, 11 million, around there?
13.
$13 million. So that's what we need to find in order to fund, because the committee made its previous decision. So are there plans or solutions being developed to ensure facilities available for PTS residential treatment are available for PTSD residential treatment, 8 primary care teams, and the community living center beyond the next 3 to 5 years?
Yes. So the all of those will be being given at the current site, and that was the 3-year time period that was referenced. If we are able to divest ourselves of the hospital, which is our intent, then we will find space in the community to offer those services while we look for a permanent solution.
And will some facilities continue to be located in the current Denver Medical Center campus, or will additional construction take place on the Aurora campus?
Initially, it will be on PTSD, CLC will be done on the, and the 7 PAC teams will be done on the current campus. And we will be looking for solutions in the Metro Denver area for community-based outpatient clinics. And on the current campus, PTSD and CLC will ultimately end up there.
Well, thank you. Will the opening of the new Aurora VMAC decrease wait times for veterans in the community, and at what rate?
So because of the PAC model, we're looking for efficiencies of throughput to be able to get more veterans in. We have PAC at the current facility, but the physical constraints don't let us operate PAC as the model is intended. The current design will allow that, so we anticipate some efficiencies, but it would be hard to state exactly because the metro area continues to see growth, and we have to address the 7 PAC teams.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. It's difficult to argue that this Congress didn't provide the money when this is over $1 billion over budget. And by the way, passage of asset review raises that 10 million threshold to 20 million. You'd be able to go right ahead with it. So that's another reason we need to do this. Mr. Bost, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was going to ask a question. I'm going to go ahead and send my question just in writing concerning some personnel hiring practices and things like that. But with that, I'd like to yield my time to Representative Kaufman.
I thank the gentleman. First of all, Mr. Takano, what our conversation was about was that PTSD was not included in the initial plan for the hospital. So it was after the fact that a standalone building was added for post-traumatic stress disorder. In the negotiations to get the $1 billion for those cost overruns, there were 2 buildings that hadn't broken ground yet. One was the CLC for the Community Living Center, and the other one was for PTSD. And as part of the negotiations to get the $1 billion, those had to be scrapped, and now we're going to get them put back in. So my question was, as an Iraq War veteran, how is it in 2009, 2010 that we broke ground for a project without PTSD, without a plan for it? And that's certainly the case. Ms. Fiotis, under your leadership, the new Rocky Mountain Region VA Medical Center construction project has been plagued with excessive cost overruns, a 4-year schedule delay, and overall mismanagement of the project. When did you become aware of the variances in the project's scope, schedule, or cost that put the project at risk of completion as originally planned? In other words, when did you, in working on this project, realize that it was getting out of control, that it was not going to be on time, that it was not going to be on budget?
Congressman, I joined the VA in January of 2013, and over the next few months became familiar with the project, visited the site, talked with the contractor, of course talked with our teams. I heard varying versions of cost increases and schedule delays. At the time that we were looking for ways to move the project forward and keep progress on the construction going, the contractor filed a claim with the Civilian Board of Contract Appeals. And from that point on, we were in a position where the VA had taken the stand with advice from General Counsel, its then General Counsel, that the contractor was obligated to deliver the facility for $610 million based on the supplemental agreement they signed in 2011. That was the VA's position. That was the position that I was relaying to you as well.
But you knew that wasn't correct, that the project at that time, given all the change orders, could not be built for that amount.
That is not accurate, sir.
All right, I disagree with that. What is the total number? Who can answer this question? So the total number of personnel is now going to be in the new hospital is now going to be 3208. Am I correct in that?
That sounds correct, sir.
Okay, so we have an increase in personnel, dramatic increase in personnel. We've got double the square footage, but in effect we have less capability. I mean, there are some things that are added, like spinal cord, but in terms of the primary care outpatient, obviously tremendous reduced capacity in that. Am I correct in that?
It is less PAC teams than we currently have functioning now, yes.
Okay, and so it's essentially right now, until you get these new C-box built, these new outpatient clinics built, the Aurora one, I think that the lease is coming up. Am I correct in that?
That's correct.
And so are you at that, is it a plan to build a new facility or lease a new facility?
So the plan would be, we would go out for bid and see which of those would occur. What's available in the marketplace. There would be a market study, either use an existing or do some kind of build. And that would be in the Aurora and then also in the southern part of the metro area.
So in the southern part, then, so that could be a lease or that could be built as well?
Correct.
So how long do you think this entire process will take? And will that have to, would that require a new appropriation? I suspect if the $20 million figure is approved in terms of redefining major construction management project, then I suspect that you could go ahead then, I mean, based on our appropriation, correct?
Right, and it would be part of our SCIP process, and it gets competed against other clinic designs and desires across the country.
And how, so you need those two, so the Aurora facility you would expand and have additional PAC teams there, and then you would have, and then obviously that this, in the southern metropolitan area, this new outpatient clinic would then absorb the remainder of the PAC teams.
That would be the intent. And then also, as I stated earlier, working with VBA to move Comp and Penn to another location would free us to be able to put a couple more PAC teams in both Colorado Springs as well as Golden.
Gentlemen's time has expired. Ms. Brownlee, you recognize 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had just a more global question, I guess, in terms of things that still need to be done. We've talked about a lot of them. We've talked about the movement of the old facility and when that's going to happen, the PTSD facility, et cetera. So I'm wondering is there a timeline by which you are following to get to certain dates, and if there is that something that is out there and published that is all of us can see?
Or if you want to just do a question.
We are looking to do a move of the outpatient services from the existing facility to the new facility on July 28th. We're looking to move the remaining inpatients from the current facility to the new facility August 4th. So those are the timelines that we are working.
Understood. That timeline I understand because it's in print and I can read it.
Okay.
What I'm looking for is beyond the August opening date in terms of closing the old hospital, when the PTSD facility is going to get done. Is there a printed timeline that VA has agreed upon, all of its contractors have agreed upon, that can be shared with the committee so that clearly on this project accountability has been an issue, and moving forward now we want to have the tools to for you to hold yourself accountable and for us to hold you accountable.
Right. So we're looking after approximately 18 months. And then
is it a printed timeline, or is it one that you're, you think that's what it's going to be and that's what you're planning on, but is there an agreed upon that everybody is working towards?
Congresswoman, I think that because of some of the unknowns, including the minor threshold and the ability to construct the new PTSD, the timelines are somewhat estimates at this point. That's why the number of 3 to 5 years has been put out there. I can tell you that we are collectively looking for solutions to allow us to do it sooner rather than later. We do want to get out of this facility, but it does take some time, not knowing when we're going to be able to build the new PTSD, not knowing exactly when we're going to get the new clinic space in our existing clinics.
Can you give me a timeline when you might be able to have completed those to know with certainty when things can get done?
I don't think we can give you a timeline with certainty right now.
Can you give me a timeline to get to certainty now? Is it going to take you a year? Is it going to take you 3 years? Is it going to take you 5 years? That's all I'm asking.
No, it's not going to take us 5 years to get to a timeline.
Okay. Not 5 years. Will it take you 1 year?
I anticipate we will have a much better understanding of the timeline in the next 6 to 12 months.
Thank you. I want to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Takano.
Thank you, Representative Brownlee. For the VA and the GAO, my understanding is that the PTS residential treatment facility was a part of the original design prior to 2010. Is that correct? It was part of the original design prior to 2010?
I'm not sure that it was part of the original design. I know that at some point before 2009-10, there had been an effort to minimize the size and scope of the facility, and at that point, I think the PTSD was initially not included in the design. At what point it got reinserted, I will be honest with you, I don't know.
Could I hear from
I know when it was reinserted, and that's when we came back with the estimate for complete. I'm on. Sorry.
When was it reinserted?
It was reinserted when we came back to the Congress looking for the authority to continue and the money for the overrun for bringing in the USACE and completing it. We put it in the estimate at that time. That's what drove us to the estimate that I delivered to you that was 1.73 at one point, and in subsequent negotiations, they were that and the CLC, along with a couple other minor things, were taken out of that number that got us down to
I would ask if you could go back and re-examine the history. And my understanding is that it was originally part of the scope prior to 2010, and then it was de-scoped from the contract from when they were trying to get the costs down. So it was a matter of money, not necessarily planning, that has left us without a PTS residential treatment center.
We will provide that. We'll take that back for the
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Our Vice Chair, Mr. Blue-Rockers, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it so much, and thank you for your testimony today as well. I have one question, and then I'm going to yield the rest of my time, submit my questions, or yield the rest of my time to Mr. Kaufman. But again, to follow up on what Ranking Member Wall said, asked this particular question of Mr. Gelati. With regard to the staff positions, I understand he said that over 250 were filled out of the 421. My question is, do those numbers include vacancies that already exist at the current facility?
They do not, sir.
They do not. How many vacancies exist in the current facility?
I don't have the exact number, but I think the vacancy rate, not counting the 421, is approximately 10%.
Okay, next question. Why are we having trouble filling these vacancies? I know you answered the question, but be more specific. And which vacancies are we having trouble filling? I mean, you know, I know Colorado's not Florida, but it's pretty darn nice to live in. And so, in any case, if you could answer that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So there's a multitude of reasons. One is the 3% unemployment rate in the Metro Denver area. That is basically, there's no unemployment. Individuals can go work wherever they want. It's a growing healthcare market, so healthcare professionals have choices all over Metro Denver without having to move. They can just go from job to job. So it's very important for us to use the tools we have available, not only to recruit, but to retain the staff. The mission attracts a lot of our workforce. So the one area that we've made major improvement in was nurse pay. Our nurse pay lagged in Denver, and then we have been very aggressive in the last 2 years with nurse salary rates, making sure they are comparable to the community's rates. So we've been able to recruit and retain more, but that is still an area that we are looking to hire more. Of the 421, some of the positions we're still recruiting for are nurses. We've hired about 20. We still have 20 more to go for new nurses for the new facility. So that's a key area of concentration for us.
Oh, very good. If you need any more tools, don't hesitate to contact us, because I think it's pretty desirable to work for the VA. I'll yield the rest of my time to Mr. Kaufman. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Isn't it true that you also lack an HR director? Is that true to facilitate the hiring?
No, we have a.
You have it?
Yeah, we have a new.
I think there was. I thought there was in the GAO report.
It could have been at
Let me refer to Mr. Ah.
That may have been at the time, but I'm not sure of the current status of that.
And when has that person been on board?
fairly recently, within the last 6 months.
Within the last 6 months. Okay. The I'm just stunned that just in terms of the knowledge of the history of the project is either intentionally lacking or that you actually don't know these answers. As to the design questions, it seems like anybody who would go on this project from a managerial standpoint would have this situational awareness in terms of what this evolution of this project was and where the pitfalls were in this project. So I'm very surprised, but I can certainly remember the controversy on the PTSD issue, that in fact it was not included in the initial design. It might have been taken out early, but when they broke ground, there was not a PTSD facility within it, and that was and I can remember being called by the media. What do you, as a member of Congress, what do you think about this issue? And so I think it was a combination of congressional pressure along with the VSOs that got the standalone facility. That was later, unfortunately, deleted when we had the had to get the $1 billion in cost overruns done. When do you anticipate having the PTSD, that standalone building, or I understand there might be an emergency lease to get them out of Building 38 in the old hospital? Where are we at with the PTSD residential?
So currently, it is in Building 38 until we know what we're going to do from disposal of the existing hospital. It will stay there. If we're not able to get the approximate $13 million, through the major project in time, currently now that would be a major. If we're not able to get that in time when the current building is excised, we will have to enter into an emergency lease space for the PTSD program until we're able to go onto the campus with PTSD, which is our desire.
So when do you anticipate the, I'm sorry, when do you anticipate the standalone PTSD facility, or is that in the is that in the planning process?
I think a lot of it's contingent on when we devolve ourselves from the current facility, and that I don't know the timeline yet.
Okay.
Time has expired. Ms. Custer, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thanks for being with us. I think you can tell this is painful for all of us. And as I said several years ago in the hearing, I remember an exchange with my colleague, Mr. Kaufman, that although I do care a great deal about veterans in the Denver, Colorado area, my veterans in New Hampshire, and particularly right now, Manchester, New Hampshire, have a significant problem with a facility that serves the veterans in New Hampshire. And all of us also represent the taxpayers. So we are constantly making decisions on serving veterans with the highest level of care at a price that our taxpayers can afford, frankly. And so we're shocked, and we continue to be, how these decisions got made to go from over 60 units for serving primary care down to 34. I don't understand what the plan was from the very beginning. So I want to try to zero in here on the questions about what your plan is now to make sure that after the taxpayers have spent $1.6 billion, that veterans in Colorado won't have longer wait times. Frankly, it sounds to me as though they will. So can you walk us through, and I've read the report in the Denver newspaper, and I'm trying to understand the response that was given to the minority staff. It seems to me that the plan is to move primary care outside of this facility, that it's not the intention that it goes into the new $1.6 billion facility, but in fact, it gets moved to other areas outside of the Denver metropolitan area. because apparently this facility's been built that's not adequate for the needs of Denver veterans, Colorado veterans. Can you walk us through precisely what the plans are and where you will need additional facilities, whether rented or otherwise, to serve veterans in Colorado?
Sure, thank you. There'll be 12 primary care teams in the new hospital. There will
12, I'm sorry to interrupt, but as compared to
20 now in the old.
Okay, so clearly, I'm just doing basic math. You
Correct.
will not be able to serve as many veterans in the new facility as were served in the old facility.
Right.
Can we just get that for the record straight?
That would be correct.
Okay, where will they be served, and what will you be asking the Congress to fund in addition to the $1.6 billion facility?
So the remaining teams will stay at the current hospital in Building 38.
Indefinitely?
Not indefinitely, until a decision is made on what to do with the current facility. Our desire is to get out of that facility.
In the meantime, we'll have to pay for both facilities. Everything will be double in cost.
We believe we can take away the clinic, or excuse me, the part of the physical plant and have it independently run. So the whole facility, the 600,000 square feet, will not be operational. Will just be focused on Building 38, one building. Then we have a desire to increase the primary care capacity at Aurora. We have a primary care clinic now. As Congressman Kaufman stated, that lease is due to expire. We're looking to go into a larger one.
So this is separate from the brand-new facility?
It's separate from the brand-new facility.
A separate lease that would be required?
Right. We already have an approved lease, new community-based outpatient clinic in Loveland, Colorado, which is north of the northern suburbs, and that is scheduled to open in April. And we believe that will have some of our patients wanting to go there and not have to drive through Denver traffic. Then we have in Colorado Springs and in Golden, we're working with VBA to move Comp and Penn out of those two areas. If that occurs, that will allow us to place some of those primary care teams that are left behind at the old site into those existing sites. And because our market is growing, Denver is still growing at a phenomenal rate, and trying to stay ahead of that growth, we're looking at our high concentration areas of veterans, and an area that we need to get a clinic in is in southern Denver metro area.
Well, my time is up. Can I just say, for the lessons learned, that the next time we decide to build a facility, we take into account when we are at war in two different countries with veterans that we've learned have significantly complex medical, including mental health and physical health, et cetera. So I just would like that added to the lessons learned as we spend the taxpayers' dollars and try to serve the veterans. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady, for yielding. In the South, we have a saying, a blind pig finds an acorn every once in a while. And I think that's what happened here. Through no design or plan whatsoever, the VA has less capacity on this huge campus, but it's going to force them to go ahead and put the C-box out. A very expensive way to do it, I might add, but the C-box need to be, and they showed us the last, actually the last briefing we had was the demographics of the Denver area and where the veterans are. And so they're going to, I think putting those clinics where the veterans are makes a lot of sense, and not having everybody come on that big, huge campus. And you can't believe how far it is from the parking lot to where they've got to go. So we've said this, and I've heard Ms. Brownlee say it and others on the committee many times about we need to place, and myself, put the care where the veterans are, not make them come through, like he said, through the Aurora traffic and Denver traffic to get there. So all in all, it may actually work out as a positive. Mr. Poliquin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fiotes, when you have any kind of construction project, I understand that you'll have disputes with subcontractors. How many judgments and settlements has the VA paid to subcontractors for this project?
Sorry, I would have to take that question for the record, sir. I don't have.
What do you mean? You don't know?
I don't have that number available.
Has the VA finalized all of its settlements with its contractors?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The original contract, all of the settlements have been made with the prime contractor. They're on the interim contract that we had that spanned.
Okay, they've all been settled.
They've all been
Okay, but
settled.
we don't know how much this is total, correct?
I don't recall
Okay,
the
my
exact
staff,
number.
my staff
and
will be in touch with Mrs. Fuentes after this hearing to get that number from you. Do you have any, does the VA have any management reserve or contingency funds, Mrs. Fuentes, remaining for this project?
Yes.
I will let Mr. Mills
This is
answer
not a
that.
tough question.
Yes, yes, sir, we do.
You do have contingency funds?
Yes, sir. We've
How
got
much?
about $6.5 million of that. That's the $5.5 million that we're using to fund the completion items that have been identified.
Thank you. Mr.
earlier.
Caldwell, do you, over at the Army Corps, have a contingency fund remaining for the completion of this project?
Sir, we do have funds remaining from the funds that were set up for the original construction.
Do you have a contingency fund remaining?
Those can be used as contingency funds.
So you do. How much is it?
Sir, we expect that there's going to be about $40 million available.
Okay, Mr. Vano, thank you. Mr. Vano, in 2016, the VA told Congress that there was $55 million in recurring costs and $341 million in one-time costs to activate the facility. And today we're hearing the activation cost is $341 million. What the heck happened to the $55 million?
Yeah, the $55 million turns out is not part of the activation cost.
Where is it?
Those are that was at the time the estimate for the incremental additional staff, salaries, and services provided at the new facility, over and above what's moving over from the old facility.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield the rest of my time to Mr. Kaufman, whose district encompasses this facility.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Raw, to what extent did the fact that the VA did not use professional, I think they call it medical equipment planners, in the process, to what extent did that drive cost?
The scope of our report didn't look exactly at that question, but you know, again, I think from our perspective, we looked at exactly what sorts of processes they have in place for estimating costs, and certainly didn't meet the criteria that we have in place.
Mr. Caldwell, how significant is I believe that the Army Corps of Engineers utilizes medical equipment planners when it builds a facility from the start. Obviously, you took this over very late. Could you comment on that?
Sir, we do have medical equipment planners. We do that in conjunction with the medical departments where their expertise resides. I will tell you that in this business of medical facilities, the technology is constantly evolving. So one of the constant challenges that we have on virtually every major medical facility is the fact that by the time we've gone from design through construction, there have been technological changes that have to be accommodated.
So the fact that this construction project was 4 years behind, has been 4 years behind schedule. How much did that delay drive additional cost in terms of what we've been discussing?
Sir, I can't give you a number on how that affected it, but it's likely that whether it would have been 4 years after the project would have been completed or 4 years after the start of construction, in either case there would have had to have been changes made to upgrade to current medical equipment at that point.
So the problem is rooms are configured that no longer comports with the technology in the lapse of time. Codes have changed, and those factors are going to drive cost.
Yes, sir. There's an added cost associated with that, typically.
Okay. Oh, on the question about your HR director, isn't that person just an acting HR director, and there's a question about qualifications?
I'll have to look into that, sir. I'm sorry.
Well, is it or not? I mean, is that person the acting HR director, and it does not fit the qualifications of an HR director?
My impression was that individual, that the Denver facility has a permanent HR chief. Let me take a look at it for the record.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Mr. Sublime, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually had no intention to speak, but say in the past 20 years, and maybe one of the witnesses could answer, in the past 20 years, how many facilities did the department build, open, and operate? New ones, new ones.
To my knowledge, the VA has built 4 major hospitals in that time frame: the Las Vegas, Denver, Aurora, Orlando, and New Orleans, and numerous other specialty facilities such as polytrauma facilities and others. The CBOCs are typically done as leases, not as our own construction, but yes.
And how many of those 4 major facilities were done on time, according to schedule and consistent with the estimate?
I believe that they all had schedule delays.
And the cost overruns? Or
I'm looking to my colleague for Las Vegas because that was finished before I arrived. For the other 3, yes, they did.
Okay.
And Las Vegas did not have a cost increase. There were increases to the contract, but within the appropriated and authorized funds that were provided, not after we came back for additional funds.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. I yield back my time.
Dr. Winstrup, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure who may want to answer this, but has there been any attempt in the existing facility to try and sell some of the buildings that may be scheduled for demolition rather than demolishing them? Has there been an outreach attempt? You know, I hear the economy's good in the area. You know, unemployment is low. So is there any attempt to sell the existing buildings?
Congressman, we have just engaged with the General Services Administration to conduct what they call a target asset review. That is the first phase, if you will, of a real estate due diligence that we must follow in the federal government before we can take any action on existing federal property. The targeted asset review identifies the property boundaries, identifies value constraints due to environmental liabilities or historic encumbrances. It identifies also potential interest from private or public entities in use of the facility. And ultimately, it begins to shape an informed decision about the highest and best use of the property. This target asset review is just been completed, is my understanding from GSA, and it will be followed by an appraisal by a professional of the property value. And at that point in time, we will be able to consider options for disposal, exchange, or other disposition.
I'm also curious too, you know, it's a pretty active market. Are people reaching out and inquiring? I mean, it's not necessarily, real estate isn't necessarily a one-way street. You know, people look for potential, so has there been any outreach to take a look at these facilities? And have they had the ability to take a look at them?
There may be outreach. We have to follow certain processes within the federal government.
I think that
and I think that this is the first phase.
That doesn't mean people can't inquire, regardless of what the process.
I am not personally. I am not
really
personally aware of any inquiry.
And also, when it comes to the CBOCs and community outreach, has there been a market assessment? Because that's kind of key. You know, where are we going necessarily where we need to be? And at the same time, do we necessarily have to build a new facility, a new CBOC, et cetera, if there's some former clinic or something in the area that could be used?
So as far as a market assessment goes, we do know where the veterans live in the metro Denver area with higher concentrations, so that's what we're looking at. And then both of those would be on the table, which would be most cost-effective, either an existing building or have to build one.
Thank you. I yield my time to Mr. Kaufman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Who can answer this question? How long have you known? I mean, literally, you've had to have known for years, let me just put it that way, that you didn't have the capacity in the new hospital to fit all the primary care capability from the old hospital. And yet, you're testifying today that you have no definitive plan as to how to address that issue. And can anybody explain to me, well, first of all, can you tell me when you knew that the plan for the new hospital didn't support the plan for the old hospital in terms of outpatient capability?
So I became network director in 2012 and was made aware that design was set and that our plan to deal with that, as we've articulated, was we added the Golden Clinic, we added an expanded Colorado Springs Clinic, we got approval and are activating a Loveland, Colorado clinic. We opened up an Aurora clinic. And then, so that was the plan, was to offset that by those clinics. The population growth in Denver, coupled with the PAC model, compromised our ability to successfully meet that total issue. So that's why we're looking at expanding Aurora and then looking at Southern Denver.
How many PAC teams? I've seen two numbers. I've seen 17 and I've seen 20. How many PAC teams again do you have right now?
So we have would be 20, 7 or 8 remaining, and 12 going over.
And how long have you had 20 PAC teams?
We've added PAC teams probably less than a year. A PAC team is 1,200 veterans, and the growth in the Denver area has been more than 1,200 veterans a year.
How is it that you're just bringing this to public light now? I mean, and Friday was the first time I've been briefed on having to keep primary care capability at the old hospital. And why is it just coming to light now?
Well, like I said, I got there in 2012. The plan was in place with what I stated. It's a challenge. I thought we've been transparent on the issue of the challenges with the PAC team capacity at the new facility. I'll have to look into that, sir, if we haven't been transparent. But my assumption was we were, with all the briefings we've done with congressional representatives and with the United Veterans Coalition.
And clearly, it was certainly clear on the PTSD issue, but not on the PAC team issue. And I'm just surprised that there's no definitive plan in the works, because it is going to be very, very expensive to keep this old hospital open. I mean, it is really beyond its service life. And so that's going to be extraordinary cost. And even if you, so you're going to have to maintain now the first floor of the old hospital from 3 to 5 years is the estimate that I have from you.
Time has expired. Yes. Ms. Esther, you recognize 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the chairman and ranking member for holding today's important hearing, and I want to thank our witnesses for joining us. As you're hearing from all of us, we are deeply concerned about the time this has taken and the cost overruns, because these funds are to go to serve our veterans. So now we're looking at a facility that is over cost, way late, and we're going to have 2 facilities open. So there are 2 issues I'd like to address with you. One has to do with the customer service for the veterans who are now going to have to figure out which of 2 facilities they go to, and if you've figured out how you're going to deal with that. You're talking about World War II veterans, you're talking about Korea veterans who now are going to have to figure out where their appointments are. I see massive opportunity for confusion, so that's one, and just a brief answer on that. With the other, and that's, I apologize for having been out, but I am also vice-ranking member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I serve on the Water Resources Subcommittee, and so we deal with the Corps all the time. So I have questions about what have we learned from this in specific about how are we going to do delivery of projects faster. Because if we take so long, that's how we wind up in part with the project being completed not meeting the needs that we then have. If it takes 15 years to do a project, at the beginning you have a certain set of needs you're trying to meet. By the end of it, you aren't even meeting those needs. And so the delivery time is incredibly important. So I was, in fact, just in a subcommittee, powwow about that issue, what we can do on streamlining. And so I want more specifics, both from you, Ms. Fuentes, and from you, Mr. Caldwell, about specific lessons that we've learned from this that will be implemented with core involvement on supervision and construction of VA facilities? Because I heard general remarks, but not specifics, like these are 3 things other than that executives ought to be involved. Well, yes, executives ought to be overseeing projects and holding people's feet to the fire. But that is Construction 101, and I say this as the daughter and granddaughter of civil engineers who worked on Army Corps projects. So first, it looks like we have you ready to tee up on the customer service.
Sure. We have 60 activation teams of employees working on all the logistics. And that issue you raised about notifying and working with our veterans that will be with the remaining PAC teams, that is part of what they're doing. So they will be communicated with. They will know that they will be remaining back at the current site, and they will be kept abreast throughout the entire process.
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman. And let me just state for the record, I share those concerns. This is a project that none of us want to have happen ever again. And so we have many lessons learned. The causes have been analyzed, and we have taken those reviews and assessments to heart, and we have put in place new policies, new procedures at the VA to make sure that we don't make these mistakes. And just very briefly, let me summarize. So clear definition of the requirements up front. One of the issues found with this project was that it took way too long to nail down what kind of project it was going to be. It took years of back and forth. So clear definition of the scope and the requirements. And then clear control of the scope and of changes. And we have put processes in place, not just within the Office of Construction and Facilities Management, but at a higher level within the VA to ensure that any scope changes receive the appropriate review and approval and budgetary consideration, and where there are issues of non-agreement, that the issues are raised to the Deputy Secretary. Risk-informed acquisition strategies. Clearly, the acquisition strategy on this project was not the appropriate one, and that cost us dearly. We have now put in place a very structured and disciplined way of making decisions about our acquisition strategy. Disciplined governance, and that part of it is what Mr. Caldwell mentioned before about engagement of the senior executives, but also importantly, roles and responsibilities and clear lines of decision authority for the projects. And finally, adequate resources. Clearly, we were found to be understaffed and under-resourced in the execution of this project from the beginning, and that is a lesson we have learned. We have developed a staffing model, so for the projects that we will continue to execute, we have the appropriate staff, both contracting and engineering, to see the project to fruition.
Ma'am, thank you. There are so many places you could go with your question about how to expedite projects. And let me touch on just a few. And I've got to say, the point I made earlier about senior level involvement is not a throwaway idea. That's something that's critically important to ensure that both the contractor and the other stakeholders are unified in their objectives as opposed to getting cross with each other in non-productive ways. So it does help us cut through issues if things are working well. From a construction agent standpoint, when we're doing work for the Department of Veterans Affairs or doing work for another defense agency, early involvement by the construction agent is critically important to define the scope of the project and to determine how that project will be executed. And in that process, determining what are the mission-critical requirement dates that have to be met so that you can set up an acquisition strategy that will help you achieve those. Another thing is funding. And when you talk about civil works, although I'm not in my current job responsible for civil works, I can tell you that one of the chronic problems that we have in civil works projects has to do with the continuity of funding to take that job to conclusion. The concept applies
Mr. Caldwell, could you wrap this up? We have other members, and she's exceeded her time significantly.
It applies as well to other projects as well.
Thank you, gentlelady, for you. Mr. Higgins, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have shared from both sides of the aisle in this committee great concerns regarding this project. It's a bipartisan committee. I thank the chairman and the ranking member for their leadership, and I thank the panel for appearing today. The Department of Veterans Affairs is making a concerted effort to modernize VA methods of care and to transition to an outpatient model. We need fewer inpatient beds in distant facilities and more accessible health care services closer to where the veterans reside. Yet we hear today that the Eastern Colorado healthcare system will be in the unique and undesirable position of operating both the new Aurora Medical Center and the Denver Medical Center is supposed to be replacing. How long after the opening of the Aurora Medical Center can we expect the Denver Medical Center to close?
As we mentioned earlier, Congressman, we really don't know that specifically. We are targeting sooner rather than later, but some of it will depend on the opportunities that exist for disposal of the old facility, as well as the opportunities to provide those services that will be left behind at other locations.
I represent the district, the southernmost part of Louisiana, so like my colleague, Ms. Esty, I also have a great deal of interaction and experience with the Corps. So my question for the Corps, sir, much of the difficulty of the VA that has been encountered regarding construction can be attributed to the complex and expensive design that no longer reflects modern standards of care. How would you recommend allowing for future flexibility in blueprints and plans? Is there a way that the VA can better manage the construction of a project, as my colleague suggested, that takes many years and requires regular updates to keep up with nationwide trends? How can the Corps help us streamline future projects so that we don't encounter this this type of gross mismanagement again?
Congressman, I think that the Corps and the VA have already reached a milestone, and I will say it was in conjunction with guidance from this committee and other congressional staff members to assist us ensuring that we understood what the scope of projects are. It's critically important when a construction project is being designed and constructed that we understand with some precision what Congress has authorized and how that entire project will come together, especially if it's being executed in multiple phases. So one of the things that together we have done is determine that on these future projects that we're working together on, that we are going to have a clear definition of what the scope is, a clear understanding, we believe, with the Congress about what that scope is so that we can work together effectively to achieve that.
That's an encouraging answer. If my colleague, Mr. Kaufman, would like, I would certainly yield the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Gigliotti, you stated that you've been transparent in this entire process, and I want to argue that you haven't been transparent and that the VA hasn't been transparent because of the fact is in all the hearings we had, the issue of keeping the old hospital open to house primary care outpatient services was never discussed, was never brought forward by the VA. So this whole notion that you've been transparent is absolutely false. And because you all have known for years. But I think the embarrassment of having these incredible cost overruns and having to come back to Congress with that, it was not going to be complicated by another issue. So I think it was intentionally kept away from the Congress. And let me just say that thank God, I mean, I think Ms. Esty had questions about how do we do better next time. Let me tell you, the VA, by the wisdom of Congress, will never build another hospital again on its own. It's been stripped of that authority, and I think needs to be stripped of more authority. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. General Bergman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, folks. Thanks for being here. There's two ways to make the above the fold in the newspaper. You know, and I didn't really know what the above the fold in the newspaper meant until about a year ago, but I do now. And the point is, usually it's the negative that gets the first chance to be above the fold. You know, backwards congratulations to this project, not anyone in particular, but this project for being above the fold for much too long a time. In the spirit of the timing of the season here, we are towards the end of the professional football season, and today we are looking at game films of this weekend's game, so we can tell exactly what occurred at what point that caused an outcome. Now I'm going to ask a question rhetorically. There's no need to answer this. Do you know the difference between a lesson learned and a lesson observed? Pure and simple. You didn't learn anything if you just observed it. So having said that, in the military, we are very, very big on lessons learned so that we do not repeat in any way, shape, or form the mistakes. What is the plan to collate the data? Because I've heard a couple of different people say, we're doing this, we're doing that. What is the plan, the overall plan, to collate the data of this entire experience in such a way that anyone, whether it's someone within the VA, someone within the Army Corps, someone within GAO, someone within Congress, someone anywhere, can view the game films, if you will, as it relates to the Denver VA project? Is there an overall game plan right now to put all of this together so that it does not repeat itself in the future?
Sir, speaking for the Corps of Engineers and from the point in time that we became involved, we have been collecting lessons learned. We've held a number of workshops. We've brought in a number of people, including from the DVA, Department of Veterans Affairs, as well as from across the Corps, people that will be involved in the future VA contracts to learn what we can from this project. So those have been workshops, and at the same time, we've been recording the lessons learned. At a point in time when we are completed with this project, and that point in time will be, it's imminent, and it'll be a few months beyond, we will refine those lessons and we will publish them so that they're available both within the VA, within the Corps, as well as to the committee or anyone else that would have an interest to have those. I can't speak to how far we go back. I'm speaking from the point in time that the Corps of Engineers became involved. But I think that as we work together, it is likely that what we will do is to identify some of the lessons that caused this project to get into the circumstance that it was in when we became involved. We'll work with our colleagues to do that.
So just to make sure I understood what I thought I heard you say, the Army Corps has accepted responsibility for overall lessons learned on this project, whether it's construction, whether it's design, whether it's placement, whether it's consideration of clinical outcomes based upon old hospital, new hospital, veterans' weights, et cetera, et cetera. So did I hear that the Army Corps has got the dot?
Sir, I did not intend to say that. What I intended to say is that we will take...
So you're going to take your part, or a certain part. I guess what I'm asking you collectively as a group, and I don't care, plan a meeting time and then tell one member a different meeting time, they missed the meeting, you elect them, and they got it. There's a little humor in there. Okay, the point is, don't segment this out to the point where someone doing something future, especially here in Veterans Affairs, where we're trying to figure out all the pieces and parts and what went wrong. One last analogy, and I know my time has expired. As a pilot, whenever there is an aviation incident, Think about how airplanes are pulled out of, in some cases, the depths of the ocean and reassembled. That's what we're talking about. That's what we need to do going forward, and I'm sorry I yield back, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Ms. Let's see, Ms. Gonzalez-Colon, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know the Aurora facility has undergone multiple budget changes and completion days, plus most of the staff has changed throughout this process, has transitioned out of the VA. How will you say that? Will this be one of the problems, the transition of those employees, the turnover staff, could be one of the problems or not?
I'm not sure I understood your question, Congresswoman. The transition of which staff?
Most of the staff has changed and has transitioned out of the VA during all that process. That's correct or not?
Yes. Do you mean the
Yes.
VA staff on the
Yes.
project? Yes.
Did that affected the whole process? Yes or no?
I don't believe so.
Okay, you don't believe so. So you don't understand that VA have a staff turnover on the facilities?
The staff turnover on the project team was not that significant. I thought you were talking about the turnover to the Army Corps of Engineers, that transition. I'm not sure. That's why I asked for clarification. Within the VA, the project team was fairly consistent for
So
some
staff
length of
turnover
time.
was never a problem?
I did not say that staffing was never a problem, but turnover in particular was not the issue. I think this lack of sufficient staffing and some of the project leadership was not adequate for that project.
Thank you. With that, I will yield the rest of my time to Mr. Kaufman.
I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Vanaugh, in a 2017 GAO report, it cites on page 8, in our March 2017 report, we found VA's policies were not clear or consistent in the way that they require VA to link construction and activation schedules to form an integrated master schedule. Could you elaborate on that and your concerns or the GAO's concerns about VA's ability to execute an activation plan?
Sure. Our concerns at that time were we found, when we looked at, there was an integrated master schedule at the time as well as a construction schedule and an activation schedule. As we looked at all three of them, many of the dates didn't match up where they should have matched up, so they were misaligned. We didn't have a huge amount of documentation regarding the activation schedule at that time, but just the fact that those dates misaligned was sort of the basis for our recommendation. When we looked back at VA's policies regarding that, it was not clear what should have been aligned or how these schedules should work together. Since then, VA has changed their policies so that they do sort of clarify exactly what they mean by this delivery date or this delivery date, and have worked with the Army Corps to put that together in an integrated master schedule. So at this time, we don't have significant concerns about their ability to do that going forward.
Ms. Fiotis, when can you have a copy of your activation plan to this committee and to my office?
Congressman, I'd have to ask my colleagues to answer that. I don't have the activation plan.
Have you read the activation plan, Ms. Fiotis?
I have not.
Who can respond to that?
Sir, yeah, we do have an activation plan. We can share that with the committee.
When can you share it with the committee?
This week, we have it, so.
Okay.
And Congressman, on that earlier comment, if I could, on the Human Resource Director, I misspoke. The individual is coming on in February. I believe, from what I've been told, the current acting is qualified.
Mr. Vanaugh, is that an issue that you all looked at?
I'm sorry, what was the issue?
Concerning the qualifications of the current acting human human resource person?
The qualifications was not something we looked at, no.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman, for yielding. Ms. Radewagen, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, want to welcome the panel. I have a question for Ms. Fiotes. How was the allocation of beds and floor space in the new facility determined?
I can't answer that question, Congresswoman. That design predates my arrival at the VA.
Mr. Gigliotti, I have the same question for you. How was the allocation of beds and floor space in the new facility determined?
I'm sorry, I don't know that either. The project was designed before I got to the my position.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time to Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you. Ms. Fiotes, when did you start working on, directly or indirectly, on this particular construction project?
January of 2013.
January 2013, and when were you given this essentially a promotion, albeit acting?
I was asked to be acting and have been acting principal executive director since April of 2017.
And whose place did you take in that position?
Mr. Greg Giddens.
Okay. I'm just, how can you, as a professional, I mean, you've either not answered or evaded a number of questions today that are very basic to this particular construction project. And so I'm just absolutely amazed at your lack of professionalism in not understanding the origins of this project and how you could assume leadership over something that you seem to go out of your way not to understand. Could you answer that?
What was the question?
Well, just tell me how. I'm just stunned at your lack of knowledge on this project, that anything that occurred the day before you got there, somehow you don't know. It's difference between you're saying I'm not responsible for and I don't know. But there seems to be an awful lot you just don't know. And so I guess I can understand how this project got in the condition that it is. I mean, if none of you seem to know, have any real understanding of why it was designed the way it was, I'm just, it is just stunning. I guess you're right. There is just no explanation on your part for your answers or your lack of answers today to the questions that have been presented to you. And so for the record, I would like an explanation on how we got to going from 60 beds to 34 beds. For the record, I want to know why PTSD was taken out of the initial plan of the hospital, not the standalone, but the initial plan of the hospital. For the record, I want to know when you all became aware that PAC teams would have to be left at the old hospital. And for the record, I want to know when you briefed Congress on all these facts. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. I think everyone's had an opportunity. I'm going to have a second round because of the importance of this. We're going to limit the second round to a couple of minutes. And I will yield myself now 2 minutes of time. Let me just summarize what I think I've learned in this. Number one, the initial design build is a bad idea. I think design build and include the people who are going to be working in that building and in that facility, because I think you would have had a much different facility if you'd done that. Instead of start designing it as you're building it, this was a train wreck. So I would do that. And I would include the people who are going to be working there every day. Secretary Shulkin said that this past year, when he was testifying here, that his primary goal this year was to reduce veteran suicide. And so what we do, Mr. Kaufman and I attended in that Building 38, we did, and some of y'all were there, we had a town hall for those veterans that were in that PTSD facility, and they had nothing but great things to say. And Dr. Wahlberg, who's in charge of that facility, apparently has one of the best outcomes of any in the country in that facility. And to have sort of left that out when that is a primary goal of VA. And I think the other, when we look at the construction cost of this, I looked at a hospital that we built. It's been about 8 or 9 years ago in my hometown. So about $1 million a bed. So we've got about $120 million in a 120-bed hospital. In this facility, and it's a more complex facility, this was a community hospital. It looked like it's about $13 million per bed is what we have in this facility. If you look at 150 beds and $2 billion. So an enormous cost, and we just cannot afford that. So and one question very quickly that I want to get answered on the record, two things very quickly. One, Ms. Fields, do you believe that the committee's legislation, H.R. 4243, the VA Asset and Infrastructure Review Act, would help you vacate the Claremont campus?
It would help in terms of raising the threshold for the minor construction. Yes, it would.
And what about reinvesting the money back in the VA, not to the general fund?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And Mr. Caldwell, very quickly, why do we have a second contractor who doesn't know anything about the building that's going to come into the building to finish up all these 300-plus minor things that are minimal things that have to be done? And we don't have a contractor yet. And we know the unemployment rate is very low in Denver. And we also know that the building trades have moved in these areas, for instance, Texas, and we're finding problems just getting sheetrock where we are at home now. And the cost has gone up for all this. I know the sheetrock's up 25% in our town, and we can't find anybody to put it up. So why are we not using the original contractor who knows all about this building, where every plug is, getting a second contractor we don't have and expect it to be done by August?
Sir, there were several reasons that we made that decision. One is we thought it was important that we ensure the prime contractor, Kiewit Turner, focus on completing the work that they were responsible for. We did not want to distract them with beginning to add things to the job. In addition to that, the things—
Let me interrupt you there. Isn't that what their job was, to do this, like the contract was laid out? I mean, maybe I'm confused.
Well, not the added things. We're talking now about adding things to them, and the other factor was the cost associated with using that very large contractor and the general conditions cost that we're incurring on a daily basis for having that contractor on the project site. So the longer that we add, the more we add work to them, and the longer we extend them on the job, the more the government would be responsible for those general conditions, which are going to be or would have been much larger than they would be with this smaller contract.
Well, are you confident that we can get somebody in here to do all those? Because you cannot open that building without at 98%.
Yes, sir.
It's got to be 100%.
Yes, sir. We have good confidence that we can do this. We're using an 8A, a small business firm, as our acquisition strategy. Permits us to go to a firm that has a proven track record that we can depend upon, and so we're confident that we can pull this together.
Thank you. I now yield to Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, first of all, that all the last 4 projects, to include this one, major construction hospital projects, the VA is in each project has been hundreds of millions of dollars over budget and years behind schedule. This just happens to be the worst, and unfortunately it's in my community. This project, I think, is an affront to the veterans who have made tremendous sacrifices in defense of our country in not getting the kind of state-of-the-art care that, given the fact that this hospital's so late in terms of its schedule, and it's an affront to the taxpayers of the United States that have had to pay for this. And I can tell you, I'm very disappointed. You know, President Trump ran on the fact that he was going to clean up the Veterans Administration. I think he certainly made progress, but this is an area that's very critical. And I see no change. I see absolutely no change It is the same, those that have their fingerprints on this hospital, I mean, it's virtually the same bureaucratic incompetence and cultural corruption. And so I will ask Dr. Shulkin and ask the President to clean house. And that's what he should have done from day one, and it hasn't been done. I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman, for yielding. General Bergman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm just going to reiterate, we've got a chance here to not repeat history. And the only way we're going to do that is if we're not laying blame here. We're looking objectively at what occurred and what we do, all of the stakeholders, and someone does have to have the lead, by the way, whether it's the Army Corps or somebody else. Someone, and I would suggest to you, that should be within the VA. Okay, it's your business. It's your business. So please take for action the fact that this situation needs to be objectively looked at totally in such a way that those who would potentially in the future not have any clue what happened here can read about it, study it, and not repeat it. I yield back.
Sir, I would add that we are taking the lead. We are the one that's going to consolidate them. But beyond consolidating them, to get back to the point that you made, one of the processes that were put in place is that at all of our stage gates on these projects, when we sit down with the Corps and do the reviews, that we positively review the lessons learned and record for the record how they're accomplished on this project, on the project of the future. So it's not, we are going to learn, and we're looking at that process that says, if this is what we learned here, how are we applying it on this project? And my project teams will record positively how they've evaluated that lessons learned in that future project.
So then we will, at some point, as members of Congress or anyone else for that matter, be able to review what you all created.
Yes, sir, you will.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Bergman, I would also just add that GAO is following up on all of our recommendations regarding this project and others that we've made over the years, and we have ongoing projects that also look at other aspects of VA's construction.
Well, this is an opportunity for us to excel. I mean, truly, this is bad, but we can make it good for the second time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding back. And I want to thank our panel for being here today, and I want to thank you for touring us through the facility last week. It was very informative for me. And with that, I will yield to Mr. Waltz for any closing comments that he may have.
Again, well, thank you all for being here, and thanks to the chairman. And maybe segueing from General Bergman, I think that starting several years ago under the leadership of then Chairman Miller and transitioning to Chairman Rowe, the ownership of this committee has started to change that, asking for things. I remember in 2015, we sat in this room, and that's when I was asking quite unrealistically, but out of frustration, that every change order should come to here, and we should sign off on it because we have ownership in it, and I was getting tired of being blamed for things that were outside of our ability to provide that oversight. So I think what the General is bringing up is a good point. I'd also like to say and recognize the leadership of Mr. Kaufman. It is undeniable. He is a friend and a champion of veterans. His frustration is justified and understandable. I mentioned earlier we've been getting a little more feedback, but he's absolutely right. We had no idea on these PAC teams staying over there. That took us blindsided. It was unacceptable. That should be a lesson learned, and that frustration is real, and I thank him for continuing to hold all of us accountable on that piece. So we can get this thing through. The bottom line is improved care and access for our veterans. We can't let go. It's a continuing journey, not a destination. We're scheduled, I believe, for August 11th. I would again use General Bergman's references looking at game film, and as a Vikings fan, there is a hopefulness of what can happen, but there's a flip side to that coin. There are Saints fans out there that everything seemed certain, and it was not certain. So I would caution all of you, and I know you will not, raise those toasts to what has to be done. This system was broken. There is much more work to be done. Our focus in the short term is getting that facility up, functioning and getting quality care for our veterans. So I encourage all of you to continue on with that. You can rest assured that this committee, certainly under the leadership of Chairman Rowe and the doggedness of Mr. Kaufman, isn't turning away on any of this. And with that, I yield back.
I thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. And in closing, I think you could sense from members up here a great frustration. I think what humanizes it when Mr. Kaufman and I sat down with those veterans in the PTSD unit and listened to their stories. I then left and went to Castle Rock with Mr. Bach and spoke to over 200, a standing room only crowd of veterans who were there, who'd served this country from Iraq and Afghanistan all the way through Vietnam and some even Korean War veterans that were there. And when you look at those men and women that have served this country, you understand why we're doing this and why it is. And sometimes I think in these kind of projects, we forget who we're doing this for. And it's for the patients who've served this country. And I don't want us to lose sight of that. And I think that's why there is some frustration, because we as representatives, Mr. Walz, all of us, go home and meet people whose needs are not being met. And I think I think I'm correct there. And there is light, I think, at the end of the tunnel, hopefully in August of this year. After planning this facility since the 1990s, we now have an end in sight. And it's a concrete goal, and I appreciate VA's willingness to set this goal. Transparency has not always been the operative principle. I think we've heard that over and over today. And as we have discussed this morning, many challenges persist, and meeting this activation schedule will by no means be easy. But the veterans have waited long enough, and this committee will keep a close eye on the activation process throughout the year. And I will also say that move, I have gone from an old hospital to a new medical center. I've made that transition where you move patients, and that will require a tremendous amount of planning on the hospital staff's part. I do not believe there was ever a time in the government or in the private sector when a 10-year, $1 billion hospitals were a workable model, much less a 10-year, $2 billion hospital. And the size of the capital need of the VA is enormous. I think it's $50 billion. And if we double it on everything, it'll be $100 billion. While Congress and this committee specifically have repeatedly demonstrated willingness to allocate resources, we'll never be able to solve the problem if we're not able to get value for the dollars we invest. Modern medicine is also increasingly agile, and flexible and adaptability are more important than ever. And I'm afraid VA's experience with this hospital design has demonstrated the risks of obsolescence. At the end of the day, I hope that all involved have learned lessons from the mistakes that were made and will carry those forward. Without a doubt, putting the Army Corps of Engineers in charge was the right response to the problem and that we were confronted us in 2015. I'm encouraged by what the VA and the Corps have achieved working together. By taking over a construction project when it hit rock bottom is significantly different from managing it from the outset and preventing problems before they develop. Those are different challenges. It seems the Army Corps' involvement is necessary but not sufficient for its success, and we've heard some good testimony today about how we prevent these problems that have occurred in the past, repeating themselves. A repeatable model incorporating the lessons learned must be developed and carried forward on future projects. Finally, we must all focus as much attention on stewardship of the property VA already has as on flashy new construction. I want to again thank you all for being here, and I will probably make, as Mr. Kaufman will, another trip to Denver to see how this process is going and hopefully get it on schedule and get it there and open it up and hand the keys to the medical people in August of this year. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days which to revise and extend their remarks. Without objection, so ordered. Meeting is adjourned.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you.